Hi, I'm Dana, and this is another episode of Learning to be Autistic. This is a little series that I started real close to when I first started my channel because I was very much still processing that I am autistic and processing that I'd been diagnosed as such, and it felt like I was having to really learn who I am as a person, like from scratch, from birth, like a bit dramatic to be like I was reborn, but it really felt like I was having to like redo everything from the ground up, figuring out how to make my life work as an autistic person and learning what it means to be an autistic person and learning to unmask and everything. So it felt like a real journey, and I started this little series to kind of keep track with what I was learning about myself and trying to help other people out a little bit. But I have sort of restarted the series from scratch because it's now 5 years since I was diagnosed, nearly. It'll be 5 years in September, and I feel like I've learned a whole lot more and I can explain things much better and actually even just like conceptualize things better and understand more about myself. So it feels like it's a good time to remake the videos and start from scratch with it all, and as such I've been trying to do it with a bit more order. So the last video, which I'll link up here, was all about the process of actively being diagnosed and how I went about getting diagnosed. So the next thing to focus on that comes in the little journey of being diagnosed as autistic is processing the diagnosis. And it was honestly probably the hardest thing for me to do. Like, this channel's only, I mean, the actual channel's pretty old, but I've only been making videos about autism for like 2.5 years, because it took me the first like 2.5 years before that to actually accept like I'm an autistic person. I actually like actively need to change things in my life. Like, I didn't want to tell people I was autistic. I very much thought that I could just have that knowledge of myself and carry on, you know? And realising that I couldn't just carry on and just keep going really made me reconsider a lot of things. But that's a different type of video, really. So leaving my autism diagnosis, they'd told me on the spot that I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder level 2, and then sent me off. They just sent me off with a little piece of paper and said I'd be getting a letter through. And I experienced just such total relief. I had been terrified that they were going to tell me I wasn't autistic, and then I would again be starting from scratch and having to figure out like, why can I not exist and function like everybody else can? So it was a massive relief to like not only be right, because it wasn't the relief that I was right, it was the relief of this struggle and this journey of being like, what's wrong with me? In what way am I broken? Like, what is going on? It was over and I wasn't broken, I was just autistic, you know? There's nothing wrong with me, I'm just autistic. It was incredibly validating and comforting, and it felt like an absolute weight off my shoulders. It was a real big relief. And like I say, it felt like this like struggle and this journey was finally over. It felt like a big bit of closure for me. It felt like it was like sort of closing the door on the entire life of struggles that I'd had, and being able to start afresh and sort of start again and be who I am and know who I am and know why I struggle with things in the way that I do. So a few days later I got the letter through the post, and I thought this was going to be them like offering me support, and I had quite like a limited and base understanding of autism, so I was like, they're gonna give me some therapy, they're gonna like, you know, something's gonna be set up so that I can actually function as a person and deal with life, because they've given me a diagnosis that says that I have like, what's the word, substantial support needs. So obviously they're going to support me now, right? No, the letter was everything that he'd written out during my diagnosis, typed up and like organised nicely so that I could understand it. A leaflet for a local autism group that was happening, and paperwork to get a free bus pass, which I still haven't done. And that was where I was like, oh, like everything feels different for me. I feel like a completely like remade person. I feel like everything has changed, and yet nothing's actually changing. I'm not being offered any sort of support. They're just telling me, oh, this is why you can't function as a person, bye. And I had to just return to not functioning as a person, you know, with this knowledge of why I wasn't able to, but nothing to help me actually change anything. And it was especially difficult when I was telling like my family and my partner at the time, and telling the people in my life like, hey, it turns out I'm autistic, like this thing explains so much, I understand so much now. And it also felt like I was like giving them the reason that they could understand me better and they could understand why I'm the way I am, and everyone was just sort of like, okay, carry on, like you've been fine until this point. And it was real strange to me because I had not been fine, you know, like I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety as a 12-year-old. Like at no point in my life did I feel like I'd been fine, and everyone was like, well, you've gotten this far, just carry on. And I was like, I don't know how to carry on. Like I was already massively struggling to just get through life. That was why I was like, there's something wrong with me, I need a diagnosis. And now that I have the diagnosis, you're like, okay, carry on, when I literally couldn't in the first place, and now we know why. And I spent a good while not doing anything and not changing anything and just living my life the way I had been and processing the fact that my life is the way it is, not entirely, but in part because I'm autistic and because of the way my brain works. And I started doing a lot more research into autism because up to that point, I'd been researching purely the traits and purely like what the things that made me think I could be autistic, you know? I hadn't been researching accommodations, I hadn't been researching ways that people were supported with autism. Like, I hadn't done any research into autism as a whole, purely the bits that I needed to be able to be like, wait, this sounds like me. So in learning more, I started also like massively reflecting on my past. Like, I think that's a big thing that a lot of late diagnosed autistic people experience, because you really do have to reflect on like childhood and teen years and have the self-awareness to be able to reflect on the way that your autistic traits were portrayed during that time and the person that they made you during that time. So I did a whole bunch of reflection and it started to make me really sad and really angry. And it's one of those things where I know a lot of people would probably stay away from doing that and be like, there's no point making yourself sad. But I really feel like I had to do that and go through that to be able to actually process my entire life pretty much and process the person I am and the way that I'd been treated and the way that my autistic traits had been present for my entire life, you know? And I did get very upset and very, very angry that it had taken so long for me to be diagnosed and that it had taken so long for people to pick up on things that were so incredibly obvious looking back, you know? And I know hindsight's 2020 and it's always easier to see the things that you know about, but there were just so many things that were so clearly autistic traits right from like pretty much the moment I was born, honestly. And my mum started bringing up things that, because my family were very nice on the surface, you know, everything was surface level with my family. So my mother would vocally sort of validate that I'm autistic. She'd bring up things from my childhood and my very, very, very early years and like first days of life kind of thing. You know, like she would bring up the stuff that I cannot remember and be like, oh, that's proof you're autistic, isn't it? But not actually accommodate to me in any way or change anything, just continue treating me the way she always had. And it just felt like a kick in the teeth, honestly. It just felt like an absolute like punch in the gut to be like, you know, like everyone in my life was picking up on shit and being like, Dana's weird, Dana's like this, Dana's like that. And realising that I had stuff going on and you just left me to it. You didn't try it at all. Like I had to get to 22 years old and pursue my own diagnosis in order to find out this major thing about myself that you'd all been noticing the entire time. And it also made me really pick up on how many things people, like, especially in school and when I was being picked on and when I was being bullied and the like, how many things were very obviously autistic traits and people just left me to it, you know? Like, that's the thing that really made me angry, was that throughout my entire life people noticed things and people picked up on things and people were aware of things that I myself was not aware of and hadn't picked up on, you know, because I was struggling massively and they just left me to struggle. And honestly, if I hadn't been diagnosed autistic, I'm not sure I would have ever cut off my family. And it's one of the best things I've ever done, honestly. Like, I get real sad about not having a family, but it's also a case of like, they were never the family that I want, you know? They were never the family that I'm sad about not having. They were just these people that were like mostly not very nice to me, to be quite frank, and took a lot of advantage of me and really used my autistic traits to manipulate me to get what they wanted out of me. And it was in cutting off my family and leaving an abusive relationship and learning a lot more about what it is to be autistic and how it is to be an autistic person that I felt like I was able to start sort of rebuilding expectations of myself, rebuilding what I, like, just generally how I feel about myself and what I think about myself, and just being able to accept a lot more of the way that I am as a person, you know? Like, it was already easier because I could be like, oh, well, I do that because I'm autistic and I behave like this because I'm autistic and I don't understand this and can't do this because I'm autistic. You know, I feel like I quite quickly processed the internal stuff for me as an autistic person and processed that I am autistic and that I needed to change things and that things needed to be a certain way for me. It was much, much harder to actually implement that and get that from the people around me. And I had to learn sort of a whole new like host of coping mechanisms to get through life and get through socialising and being around people and everything, knowing that I'm an autistic person and knowing that they knew and didn't care. You know, I was around a lot of people that would argue that I didn't need or deserve accommodations because why should I get special treatment? Why should I get something someone else hadn't? And that was coming from family members where, like, my oldest brother was diagnosed autistic in childhood and we all had to accommodate to him our entire lives. And yet, when it came to me, it was a case of, well, we've never had to accommodate before, so why should we now? And it took a lot of like self-confidence and a lot of kindness towards myself to be able to be like, no, I deserve better than that, I'm not sticking around for that, and setting boundaries and putting things in place so that I could begin to like build my life as an autistic person. And it's a struggle, it's real fucking hard. I often really am overwhelmed by most of life, and I've recently had to start asking friends for like more support and to actually like do things for me, because living independently and having to do everything myself has been real tough. But it's also the only way that I've been able to build a life that actually accommodates to me as an autistic person, and that doesn't completely cut off who I am, you know? I spent so many years masking and people pleasing and just allowing everyone to walk all over me and doing whatever I could to get any like little hint of validation or hint that someone liked me, hint that somebody might be nice to me. And I had to really like unpack all of that and begin receiving validation more so from myself. And I also started an entire YouTube channel, and the majority of my comments throughout the entire time I've been making videos have been very kind and very positive and very nice. And I did receive a huge amount of external validation through that. Like I definitely received way more validation online than I really healthily necessarily should. But that's where being able to accept myself and being able to like, I'm not confident in social situations still. I still get very, very anxious. But it was knowing that I was autistic and knowing that that's why I am the way I am and why I behave the way I am, and learning how to unmask and the like, that I've been able to put myself out there more and actually start making friends and building a community and not needing to receive validation exclusively from like internal sources or like the internet and places that are perhaps less healthy. But it's one of those things where I feel like I had to go through a massive amount of changing my life, cutting people out, completely like revamping my lifestyle. You know, like I moved house and everything, like I left my partner, I cut off my family, and it took me a couple of years. Bear in mind, like I had to do all this like internal stuff first, so I had the confidence and like just the self-belief to be able to do that. And I will give that it's made my life more difficult in some ways. You know, like my partner used to handle all of like the financial stuff. There's definitely ways in which it's made my life like, what's the word? There's a word. Like I can't think of the word, so I'm gonna have to over explain, but like on the surface level, to like the average passerby like observer, I can see how my choices following my autism diagnosis that I do think I wouldn't have made without knowing that I'm autistic have technically like made my life more difficult. But on like an emotional, mental level, they have vastly, massively improved my life. And it also means that I can accommodate to myself and without like the shame and the embarrassment, and without people thinking that I'm asking for special treatment or whatever else, you know? I've put myself in an environment where I can actually learn more about myself and actually, you know, commit to like forming friendships and creating a community. And it's a very, very small one, but it's one that I am committed to and do intend to see, you know, thrive and flourish and get bigger. And I do think that part of processing being autistic for me and really figuring it all out was befriending other autistic people and other neurodivergent people, and really having, you know, I don't want to call my friends my role models or my inspirations or whatever, because it's just a bit dramatic and it's a bit much, and like they're not in any sort of like, you know, I'm not putting them on like a pedestal and seeing them as more than they are, but I'm also seeing people who I absolutely adore, who I think are brilliant and amazing, and you know, they're so talented and they're so funny and they're so this and they're so that. You know, I purely see the positives in them as people, and they're also neurodivergent or autistic or whatever else, and I'm like, oh, so that means that I can be like that, you know, I can be like a person that I think is really cool and a person that I think is this and think is that, because they can be. And that's why I do think it's like really quite vital to have other neurodivergent people in your life if you're neurodivergent. Like it definitely helped me to just process that, the stereotypes that you see of autism and the way that people, you know, because I before knowing I was autistic, I perceived myself as part of the general public, so I had the same perception of autistic people that they do, and it was perhaps a little more like normalised to me because of my brother, but I still saw autistic people as largely being like quite incapable and quite a certain, you know, the stereotype of an autistic person. And I had done some unpacking of that, you know, I'd learned more, I'd educated myself, I knew that there were like different levels of autism and different support needs and everything else. Like there were things that I knew, but it's very different to actually see it right in front of you and be like, oh, I love this person, I love the person that they are, and they need these things that I previously was like embarrassed to need myself, or didn't think that I needed myself, or just generally encourage me to support myself and accommodate to myself, while also helping to support me and accommodate to me. Like I really don't think I would be as accepting and understanding and kind to myself as I am now if it weren't for the people that I met who are also neurodivergent, who are also, you know, just trying their best and trying to do their best for themselves. They aren't always perfect at it, and that's where it's really nice to have friends that are like on the same level of things as I am and understand me and understand how it is. And I always feel bad when I bring it up in videos, because I know I know how difficult it is to get to that point, you know. I spent many, many, many years where the only people I saw were my mother and my partner at the time, who were both abusive and not very nice to me. But I do really think that, like, the final step that has come much, much later than my diagnosis and me fully processing that I'm an autistic person is just being around people with other neurodivergencies, and even just, like, in general, the disabilities, and being like, oh, we're still cool, we're still good people, we're still this, we're still that, you know? Just fully seeing the representation and being able to process that and accept myself through that. But that's the final point that I have for this video. As always, I hope it's been, like, sort of useful or insightful in some way to someone. I hope someone gets something out of this, essentially. That is what this series is all about. It's what my whole channel's about at this point. You know, I just have put so much work into trying to understand myself better and understand being autistic better that I feel like I need to do something with it and put it out there. So I hope it's been helpful to someone, and I'm so fucking ready to stop talking now. So I post here on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Sundays. I post over on TikTok every single day, and I post very sporadically over on Instagram. So you can follow me in any of those places if you fancy. They'll be linked down below. If you're somehow not affected by the cost of living crisis or the recession, you lucky bastard, you can do a little bit of good and send me some money over on Ko-fi or Patreon, but there's no pressure, you do not have to. I always feel so awkward asking for money, and it's only getting worse with the state of the country that I live in, but it's there if you want to, and it does massively, massively help me out. And sometimes it means that I can buy myself a slice of cake. Love cake. I never thought I was a cake person, but recently I've been loving just having a slice of cake every now and again. So yeah, anyway, that was the video. Please do comment with your, like, thoughts and opinions on this and how you feel like you process being autistic, if you went through anything the same as me. I don't know if I already asked you to comment or not. My brain starts turning off at the end of videos. As soon as I get to the outro, my brain's like, oh, we're done then. And it's like, no, we've got to actually say goodbye to people. So whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you're having a lovely morning, evening, day, afternoon, week, month, year. And I will see you again in a couple of days.